This is a Figma Basics tutorial. When you first open Figma, you're going to see your workspace over here, and this includes your files. These are your shared files. So you also have drafts up here. These are your unshared files. So on a free plan, here's where you'll see all your drafts. They're unlimited, but the shared files are limited to 3. All right, now let's say we want to start a new file. We'll go to drafts and we'll create the new file in the drafts. So create new design file, and it opened a new untitled Figma file. All right, so on the left, this is where we see our pages and our layers, and we'll get into that in a second. Down here is our toolbar. We'll talk about this. And to the right is like the properties bar, and we'll talk about this in a while also. All right, let's discover the toolbar. It works similar to Adobe tools. So basically this has the move tool over here, hand tool where you can move the canvas, scale tool, and we'll see all of these in action in a while. This is the frame tool. Basically this is the equivalent of creating an artboard or a screen. This is the shape tool where you can draw different shapes. We'll get into those. This is the pen tool, also has a pencil tool. This is the type tool. This is a comment for adding comments. We'll see how this works. And this is like actions. It has several things that you can do over here. We'll also discover it in a while. It also has plugins and things like that. This is the dev mode. It's for developers. We're not concerned with that at the moment. All right, so let's start. Let's say we're designing a mobile app. First of all, we need to create a frame. We can press this or we can use the shortcut. So when you hover over here, it tells you the tool name and the shortcut. So if we hit F or if we press this on the right shows us the sizes that we can use, or we can draw a free custom size. All right, so right now, for the sake of this example, let's choose an existing size. Let's choose the iPhone 14 and 15 Pro. There we go. This is our first screen. Okay, to zoom and zoom out, it's the same as Adobe. So Z, you hold Z, it turns into a zoom in. You hold Z and Alt, it turns into a zoom out. So you click, you zoom in, you click, you zoom in and out. You can also drag. All right, same as Adobe. All right, so let's add a title over here. Let's say sign up. So we click the type tool, then we click inside the frame and we write whatever we want. Sign up. All right, then we click outside. We have a bounding box over here. Now let's say we want to increase the size. On the right, we see all the properties of this item that we just created. So in the font size, we can add 20 over here. We can make it bigger, or if we want to manually scale it, notice if I just move here using the move tool and I scale it, it just scales the box. Whereas if we hit scale, I usually use the shortcut, which is K. Notice what happens to the cursor. It turns into like a double arrows over here when you move it over the box. When you scale it now, it just scales properly. Another thing to note when dealing with type is the alignment. So let's align this center, and I'll show you why we're doing that right now. Okay, and let's align this to the center of the screen. We can either do this by dragging, or we can just click the item and then use the align center from here. All right. Now let's say we wanted a longer title. The reason I centered this a minute ago is because when we want to add something, hello, sign up. So it stays in place centered when we add. Whereas if it had been left aligned, we would have had to fix the alignment again. I'm gonna undo right now. We don't need all that. Now let's add some input boxes for the name, for the password, and then we'll add a button. So what we can do is we can either add a frame inside this main frame, or we can add it using a rectangle. Let's use a rectangle for now. All right, so let's change the color and let's add a stroke. We add a stroke, we just click the plus from over here, and let's change this color. Let's make it slightly off-white. And the stroke here, we can change the color. Let's make it gray. What we can do also is adjust the corner radius. So we do that by searching for the corner radius over here. See this curve? So we can either add a number or we can drag this. All right, so this would be 8. Okay. Now to copy this, we can either copy paste. Let's align this first to center. And usually when you're working, we create grids for better alignment, for margins. So let's create a grid. You click the frame, you go to layout grids, and you add one. Now this is a pure grid. Let's see it in the form of columns. So let's click columns. Now we have a column grid. But let's add some margins, because this one doesn't have margins. So what we do is we click this icon of the grids. Then in margins, let's add a number here. Let's try 20. Let's make it 30 for now. All right, so now we have our column grid. So let's align our input box. We can hold Alt and resize, so it resizes it from both sides. And we align it to the grid. Now we can hide the column grid. And we do this by clicking the frame and clicking the eye icon. And this eye works the same for all properties. I just hid it. All right, so let's duplicate this. We can click it, hold Alt, and drag Shift so that it drags in the same axis. Let's now create a button. What we can do is we can also duplicate this and turn it into a button, or we can create a new button. The button, let's give it a different color. Let's remove the stroke. So we remove it by clicking minus. And let's give it, let's say, a blue color. We can choose the color that we want over here. All right, let's give it a more curved radius. So while it's still selected, I just made it round. Now let's add some text, the button label basically. Let's say this is sign up. All right. This is too big though. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna center it. It's already centered. I'm gonna align it. So I click the text, I click the button, and I align them together using the align tools. And I'm gonna group it, okay? Control G, similar to Photoshop and Adobe Illustrator. So if I want, now since it's a group, I want to select the text inside this button. So I can either double click, then double click again to select it, or to deselect, I just double click outside. I can hold Control and click once. This selects whatever item is inside a group, remember, because we just grouped it. Now check this out. Let's make this font smaller. Let's try 20, for example. Too small. Let's try 30. All right. Now notice when I did this, it got kind of aligned up. So before doing this, I'm gonna center align, middle align the text. So now when I turn this into 30, it remained in the center. So these small things, they help us, they speed our work up if we pay attention to them and do them. All right, now we have a sign up button. We can even make this a bit smaller. All right. And by the way, you can change all the fonts and the style over here on the right. Any properties related to the item we've selected, you can change it from this right panel. All right. Now let's have a look at our layers. So on the left here, notice everything we created, it was given a name. So the best practices would be to give each group or each element a name so that we can easily find it once we're looking at the layers panel. So let's call this button. Okay. Rectangles, let's call these input boxes or input. All right. I'm going to leave the second one because I'm going to show you what we're going to do with it in a while. By the way, the pages over here, if you want to create another draft of this, for example, right click, duplicate, or we can create a new page like version 2 or whatever we want to put here, it creates a new page. Right now we don't need it. I'm just going to delete this. So we are working on page 1. And one more thing, it's also one of the best practices to name our frames. So this one, let's double click the frame title. Let's call it sign up. All right. Let's go back to our input box. Let's say we want to have a placeholder text inside it. We hit the T, which is the shortcut for the text tool. And let's write name. Now let's left align this because this should be left aligned. Okay, let's make it smaller. Let's make it, let's say 20. Yeah, 20 is fine. And since it's a placeholder, let's give it a gray color, or we can change the transparency of the black. We select it. We can either write the transparency here, or we can just directly on the keyboard, if we want to make it like 50% transparent, we can just select it and write 50 on the keyboard. Notice opacity set to 50 or 25 or whatever number. If we want to change it back to 100%, we just hit 0 on the numpad. For this example, let's just make it 50. All right, now let's group this as well. So hold shift, we select our items, then Control G to group them. And let's call this input box. All right, now this here, we need to create another one similar to this one for the password. All right, instead of like creating it again, what we can do is turn this one into a component. A component is an element that we are using many of. So anytime if we have to change it, we just change the main component and it changes all the instances of this component. Let me show you what I mean. So let's right click and then create component, or we can select it and hit this button over here, which is also create component. Now this is a component. Notice on the left, its icon has changed. Now since this is the main initial component, let's move it outside our frame, and I'll tell you why in a second. Because we should gather our components in one place and use them to create our design system. So basically, if we're creating our design system, maybe we can put it on another page. We put all our components there, like we put all the buttons together, all the input boxes together. So whenever we need to change a design, we just change the component and it applies it to all the instances in our design. All right, so now what we do is we need an instance of this component. So what we can do is either copy paste, Control C, Control V, or like select and Alt drag. So I just did this, I dragged into my screen. Now we need another one for the password. So also Alt drag, and I just change this into password. So notice now this is our original component. These are two instances. If I edit an instance, it doesn't change the main component, but what I can edit is limited. I can only edit the style and the text. I cannot, for example, add something new in the instance. If I want to add something new, I should add it in the component. And notice something, if I change the color of the parent component, for example, fill, it changes all the instances. You see? I'm going to undo this. All right. Now let's say you want to add another one of these input boxes. Let's say confirm password. All right. I could, of course, I'll drag. Okay, and I'd have to position it in the same distance so that it's all equally aligned. But instead of doing this manually, I can use something called an auto layout. I'm going to delete this and show you what an auto layout does. So I click the items that I want to use in the auto layout, and I go to the right over here, use auto layout. What this does is now whatever I add into this group is going to use the same spacing. So for example, now I hit this, I copy, I paste, it already gives it the same spacing. Paste again, this is the same space again. Let's just use 3 for the sake of this example. I'm going to delete this. Now if I select this group and I select, notice the auto layout properties, I want them to be centered. So I'll choose the align top center. And this is the spacing between the elements, so I can increase it, decrease it over here. We'll have a look at the auto layout in another example in another screen, but for now, just remember this. And now for this instance, let's call it confirm password. All right, now let's add some more text below. Okay, I click the type tool. Let's say already have an account. And I'll move this to the center. And under it, I'll just write register. Okay, so again, let us center these. align them to the center. The register, let's give it a blue color. So what we can do is use an eyedropper tool. We either press I and then select the color, or we can select the color here and select the eyedropper tool. Same thing. All right, let's give this a different color. Let's make it gray. There you go. Let's change the sizes maybe. Let's make this 18. And let's turn this into medium. All right. There we go. Let's also add like a checkbox over here for the terms and conditions. What we can do is we can control click one of the boxes and then paste it, but we can keep it in the auto layout, why not? And we want it to be aligned to the left. So notice, since it's in the auto layout, it's remaining in the center. So what we can do is select the auto layout and then align it to the left. This aligns it over here. Or we can just remove it from the auto layout, Control X and paste outside. Now let's turn this into a square. We can do this by using the sizes over here. So let's add manually over here 40 for width and 40 for height. There we go, or we can even make it bigger. This is fine for now. And let's reduce the corner radius, for example. Let's make this 5. Now let's add the text over here. All right. This has to be left aligned, so let's left align it. I agree to terms and conditions. And we want this to be almost black, so let's fix the color. All right, there we go. And this one, let's align them and group them. When we group them, let's call it terms in the layers. Terms and conditions. All right, there we go. So let's assume this is our first screen. Let's just fix it a little bit, the alignments. Let's raise this a little bit. Let's raise these a little bit. We drag select, similar to Adobe. All right, when you move things, notice like the guides, they show you like the distances so that you can align things properly. Notice here, for example, when it's in the center, it's going to show you the numbers. All right, let's create our next screen now. What we can do is either we can duplicate this first screen by Alt-Shift-Drag, or we can just create a totally new screen using the frames like we did in the beginning. I'm going to go the long way. I'm just going to create it from the beginning. Okay, so I select the frames. I select this one. I align it. Usually I Alt-drag, but I'm going to do this to show you what we can do with the type. So let's add a title. Let's say welcome, for example. Okay, let's change the size. Now, let's say we want to make sure this font is the same size as this title. We can either copy the properties from here. Let's make this 42 because it's a better practice to use round numbers. Okay. Instead of copying these properties manually every time, we can add them to our library. So we select the item, the text item, then we go to this icon over here, apply styles. And these are our styles that are already in the library. Now notice over here we have the Material 3 Design Kit, which is for Android. These are like the standards. So we can select one of these. And below we have the same for iOS, under iOS 18. Or we can create our own. So if we want to create our own, we just hit the plus. And we give it a title. Let's call it title. And create style. Notice now, whenever we want, it's over here on title. So to resize this font, we just click it. And instead of searching it for here, we search in our library and we select title. Now they are the same. Let's align this to the center and let's align it to the same alignment as the other title. There we go. Now let's add some circles over here. Let's say like either something like stories or whatever. So what we can do is hit O as a shortcut for the circle tool. By the way, the move tool, the shortcut for it is V. Or we can hit the shapes and then select ellipse. We go over into our screen and we draw it. Now I want to tell you about something. If we draw our circle outside, it's not going to be inside this frame. See, when I move this frame, this is outside. So when we're working, let's make sure we are working inside our desired frames. So if this is outside, we can drag it inside our frame. So now it is inside. Okay. So let's say we are creating stories. So I'm gonna Alt Shift drag to create another one. And let's create an auto layout because I want these to continue horizontally. So we can either make another one. Now I'm intentionally gonna space it wrong. Okay. I'm gonna select them all. And now I'm going to turn them into an auto layout and show you what happens. So when I hit this, it automatically aligned them equally. But let's reduce the spacing. So we can do this either by selecting this and manually dragging it, or we can enter a number here or drag it from here. Okay, let's add some more. So I'm going to select this, Control C, Control V to add more. Let's space them a bit further. All right, there we go. Now let's say we want to add some posts, some image posts. Let's add them using our rectangle tool. Okay, let's add this one. Let's add some more. Let's center it first. Let's give it some round corners. And now let's Shift Alt drag. And to duplicate, we can use Control D. Notice what happens here. Now these are all outside our frame, and our frame is set to clip content. If we want to see the content, we just select the frame and uncheck clip content. Now we can see what's outside the frame, and we can see that these have extended outside the frame. Now let's call our second screen main. So this is our main screen over here. Okay. Now, how can we preview what we've done? So there's a quick way to preview, because in Figma right now we're working on the design mode. We can also view prototype mode over here by clicking here. All right, let's talk about interactivity. Let's say when we click our sign up button, we want to go to the welcome screen. So what we do is we select our button, we go to prototype mode. Once we hover our mouse over this element, we notice the plus button. So we just click and drag where we want this to go. I'm dragging it to the second screen. Notice what happens here. It's asking us about the interaction. So on tap, action, navigate to main. And we can change these, by the way. But right now we don't need the other stuff. And we don't need an animation right now, so this is fine for now. Now let's see what happened. Notice it added a flow here. So this is the flow starting point. Now to test this quickly, we can select our screen here and Shift Space. This is the quick prototype preview. All right, notice now when we hit sign up, it took us to the welcome screen. Notice there's no horizontal scroll and no vertical scroll either. So we have to assign these. So let's go to our main screen, click the frame. Then in prototype mode, overflow, it says no scrolling. Let's say vertical. So now we have a vertical scroll, and let's test our prototype again. So we hit the first screen, Shift Space, or we can click this button over here to play. Okay, sign up. Now we have a vertical scroll. Okay. But let's say we don't want this title to scroll. So let's work on that. We click the item that we don't want to scroll. In prototype mode, right now it says scroll with parent. Let's tell it to stay in place, fixed. Now notice what happens. We select the frame, Shift Space to test it. It stays in place. We can add like a white rectangle under it so that the elements will be hidden. So let us do that. All right, let's turn this in design mode. We click design. We write the number of the color, or we select it. So F is for white. And let's group these. Okay. We select them, we select them using hold Shift select and Control G to group. Now this group, we want it to stay in place. So we go to prototype and it's already fixed. Let's test it. See, this is what we wanted. All right. Now let's create a horizontal scroll. So we select these. Since these are in an auto layout, if we change the frame's bounding box, we make it intersect the edge of our frame. And now what we can do is tell it to clip the extra content. So over here, auto layout, clip content. And now we select this, we go to prototype, and scrolling, it's asking us what to do with the overflow, because these items are overflowing this frame. So we tell it horizontal scroll. Alright, let's test what we have now. Shift space, notice we have a horizontal scroll now, and we have a vertical scroll now. This works the same way as frames do, for example. So let's say we don't have an auto layout. What we would have done is we would have selected the items, we would have framed them, right click, frame selection, then adjusted the frame to the edge of our screen, and it would have worked the same way. Alright, now let's add these pictures. These are placeholders, we didn't add the photos yet. I'll show you how to do that in a while. Let's add them to an auto layout. So we select them, we create the auto layout. Now notice something. If we resize our auto layout, the width is changing. We don't want this width to change. So what we do is we select the inner items, and notice the width here, it says fill. We don't want it to be fill, we want it to be fixed. So let's say fixed width. Okay, let's do the same for the others. We select the one we want to copy, we copy it, we select the others, then we click Ctrl Shift R to replace them all. Now these are already in an auto layout. If we wanted them to align horizontally, what we do is we click the horizontal layout. See, notice what happened. And if we want them to automatically wrap, notice what happens now. Okay, I selected wrap. Now if I change the frame into something that fits, see, it automatically distributes them. If I add an extra one, Control C, Control V, it's going to add it to wherever fits, basically. Now this one, if we select the scale tool and scale them down, they're going to fit inside our frame. And we can center this. Alright, now let's say we don't want any of this. I'm just going to undo everything. Alright, let's create another frame. I'll drag. I'm going to delete everything I don't need from inside this frame. Let's say I just need this main image. I'm going to delete this, copy paste, and this is our image over here. Notice now when I'm resizing it, it's still under the scale tool. So let me press V to go back to the move tool so I can resize it freely. Okay, I resized it freely. What we can do to remove the corner radius is either hover over the corner and use these dots, or we can use the radius over here, turn it back to 0. Okay, before I continue, let's explore how we can put some actual pictures over here. So we can either drag a picture into this, or we can use one of the plugins to add like a dummy picture or dummy content. And let me show you how we do this. So we can right click, click plugins, manage plugins, and we can search for whatever plugins we want over here. So one very useful plugin is called Content Reel. So Content Reel. This allows us to add dummy content. I already have this, so you click it, you run it. And here's how it works. So you select the item that you want to change, let's say this one. And it is an image. Let's say we want to add someone's picture over here, so we can either choose one of these selections, or if we want to add, let's say, something else, let's try the Airbnb image over here. This is a collection basically. We select, these are like dummy images. And what we can do for multiple pictures, we select them all and we say apply all. It will give them random images. Notice? Alright, and for these we can do the same. And we need to select the actual circles. Now we cannot see the other circles, so I'm going to select the frame. I'm going to unclip to see the content. Okay, now we can select the circles. Now we can add avatars. Notice it randomly assigns them. Okay, so now let's clip it again. Alright. Now I'm gonna break this auto layout. So Control Shift Group to ungroup, actually Control Shift G because it was already grouped. An auto layout creates a group, by the way. And now I'm gonna copy this image. Actually, let's switch these two images. Let's switch this image with this one. So if we select two, notice it adds like a circle in the middle of both images. And now what we can do is click the circle and drag. It switches these two images basically. Actually, let's switch it with this one because it's nicer. So same thing. All right, let's take this image, copy, paste it in the next screen. Let's call it pic. Select the frame, paste it over here, and let's give it the same size. So we can either do it by copying the numbers from design mode. We copy these numbers and then we add them here, or we can do it manually. A better practice would be to add the numbers to make sure that it resized properly. And to remove the round corners, either do it from the corners over here. We can drag these circles, make them 0, or we can write 0 over here like we did previously. Now let's say we want to click this to enlarge the image, to view it in full screen mode. So we go to prototype mode like we did earlier. We scroll to the edge of the image, we drag it. But this time, last time it said instant. This time let's try to see what Smart Animate does. Okay, so we click this, we select Smart Animate, and let's test it. We test it. The quick test mode is shift space like we did previously, or we can test it using this presentation tool. Let's try this presentation tool this time. It opens it in a new tab basically. Alright, so once we click this image, notice what the Smart Animate did. It animated the small image to the big image. Now let's add an action to go back once we click this to close the full screen preview. So we click the frame or the image and then we drag to the previous screen, on tap, navigate to. It remembers the last mode that we chose. So if we chose Smart Animate, it remember it, or if we chose something else, it's gonna remember it. So now we go back to the preview. It's already open. We click this. So you notice the animation. If we had selected instance, we wouldn't have seen the small animation. We can drag, we can scroll. All right. Let's try one more thing. Let's go back to our prototype. Let's say we're designing for Android. Let's add like a button over here. Let's add like a plus button. So let's select the ellipse. We add it. Let's make it blue. Now, remember how we talked that we can add styles to the library? So this blue, let's save it to our library. We select any blue item that we want, like the color that we want. From here, apply styles and variables, and we select the plus like we did previously to add it to our library. Let's call it blue. And we create the style. Now when we select our circle, instead of selecting the color manually with the eye picker, we can just select it from our library. See, blue. Now it's the same blue. Now let's give it some shadow. We select the item. From effects, we add plus, and we can select whatever we want to do. We have inner shadow, drop shadow, layer blur, background blur. Layer blur and background blur, you can use it for overlays and things like that. You can experiment with these later. So let's add a drop shadow for now, and we can edit the drop shadow parameters from this icon over here. We can increase the blur. Let's make it 10, for example, just to show you what happens. Let's add the Y is the distance on the Y axis. It's 10, and this is the opacity. Notice what happened here. Let's keep it. Now let's watch what happens in our prototype. See, we have this button, but it's scrolling. We don't want it to scroll. We want it to stay fixed in place. What we can do is we select this, we go to prototype, and instead of scroll with parent, let's say stay in place. So now this would not scroll. Let's try it. There we go. Now it's fixed to the bottom. Alright, let's fix the place. I want to show you something else. Let's say we're designing for a different screen size. First, let's hide these. Let's clip them so that it's easier to see what we're working with. Alright, let's say we're designing for a different screen size, a longer screen or a shorter screen. Notice once we resize our screen, we want this to stay in the same corner. So what we can do first is we select this item and we use something called constraints. Right now, this item is by default constrained to the top and the left. We want it to be constrained to the bottom corner. So we click this dash to make it to the bottom and this one to make it constrained to the right. Notice what happens now. When I resize my frame, see, it stays in the same corner in the bottom. And notice what happens to the title. It's moving. Why? Because it's probably constrained to the center. If we want these to be constrained to the center, once we resize our screen, let's try this over here. Center, notice what will happen now. And I'm gonna undo all of these, but I'm just showing you what happens. See? Now once we resize, it remains in the center. But since it's not 100% centered, this is happening. Let's try centering it now. Now once we resize, it's going to remain in the exact center. Alright, I'm going to undo all of these. Now let's add an icon to this button that we just made. We can either draw them manually and place them, or we can use a plugin for that. Let's use a plugin. For plugins, we can either search for them here, or we can right click plugins, and whatever plugin you use, it's gonna save it over here in the recent plugins, or you can save it. You can also find it here. A very useful plugin is called Iconify. So let's search for it. Iconify. There it is. We click it. It takes a while to load. All right, and let's search for the icon that we want. Right now, let's add a plus. So plus search. There you go. Let's choose any one of these that we like and drag it. Now that we dragged it, we can close this. We can get our icon. All right, what's happening here is that since our button is fixed, notice on the layers panel on the left, this new icon is landing under scrolls. So what we can do is drag it on top into the fixed over here. And now we see it on top. So this is the layer order, but whatever is usually fixed, it's gonna go on top of the things that scroll. Now we can select these two, we can align them. Now notice all the icons that we import, they are inside frames. So let's resize this. K to use the scale tool, Shift, Alt, drag to resize proportionally. Let's go back to the move tool by pressing V. All right, now let's turn this into white. And I want to show you something. Let's say we selected this icon frame. Let's say we also selected the button. On the right, it shows us all the colors of everything that's selected. So what we want to do is just change the black. So let's select this black over here, turn it into white, and there we go. Now we have a white icon. If we wanted to add the back button, we do it the same way we did for this plus icon, or we can draw it. There's one more thing I want to show you. Let's go back to our sign up screen. Let's say we want to show button states. So this sign up button, if we press it, we want to change the color of the press state, for example. What we can do is turn this button into a component. Let's drag it outside, turn it into a component, either by right clicking like we said, create component, or the shortcut is Ctrl-Alt-K, or we can use the component button over here. All right, now we're going to create something called a variant. So we click the component and we add a property over here, like add property plus, we call it variant. So it's the same component, but it has a variant with a slight variation. So we clicked it and we clicked the plus, it created this other instance of this button. And now this one, let's change its color. What we can do, if we select this, it's going to only show us the options we have in our library. So what we need to do is break it. Notice this, detach style. It turned it back into a regular color. Now this color, let's make it, for example, lighter or darker, whatever you want. Let's make it darker. Okay. And see, this is our main one. This is our, notice property one, default. Now this is a variant 2. Let's give it a name. Let's call it pressed. So we click it, we write pressed. There we go. We can even rename the property. So state. state default, this one is pressed. Alright, now that we've created our button, let's replace our button. So what we do is Control C to copy the component, select the button that we want to replace, and Control Shift R to replace it. Notice it turned purple. Now let's make sure that the action still works. Once we click, it's blue. Once I release, it's the light blue. But because we replaced this, the old action has become secondary. So what we should do is select this arrow, delete it, and redo the action. From prototype mode, drag again. On tap, navigate to main. So this is correct. Now let's test it again. I'm clicking, it's turning dark blue, releasing, it's navigating. So this is what we want. Alright, the flow, we can rename it by double clicking it. Let's call it start. And don't forget to name your file. You do this by double clicking over here, and let's call it tutorial. Alright, so, and notice all the arrows, like the arrows show you like the relationship between the screens, the different screens. This shows in prototype mode basically. There's one more thing I want to show you. Let's say we took this component instance, let's paste it over here, and let's say we want to change this. Let's say we want to add a plus icon or something inside this button. If we take this icon, copy, I cannot paste it over here because this is fixed basically. So what I need to do, either I should add it into the main component and hide it, or I create it as a variant with a plus basically. Or if I want to edit this one, I have to right click, detach instance, and now it's back to being not a component, and I can paste whatever icon I want inside it. Add, for example. There are a few more things I'd like to show you. Let's say we have a group within our frame, and we want to resize our frame, whether it's to turn it into a website or whether it's a longer mobile screen. If we just drag the edges, notice how the things with constraints move. So what we can do is hold Control when we resize, and those things will stay in place. Same thing if we do it vertically. Another thing I want to show you is regarding images. Now let's say we want to change this image. We select it, we double click it. We hover over here and we can upload any image from our PC. So we go into our folder, we select an image, and it will replace it. You can also access this by clicking this and clicking the image from here. You can also add some effects over that image. You can also drag an image into the screen, and then you can resize it. You can also, let's say this image is huge, you can drag it into a frame. So I'm dragging, okay, or you can cut it and select a frame and paste it inside the frame. This frame, let's clip it so you see what I mean. And you can resize it to be the size of the frame. I want to show you an effect you can add to this image. I'm going to Control click to select the image and not the frame. Let's say I want to add an overlay. I click this, it adds like a transparent layer on top. So I can add the opacity over here. This 50%, and I can change the color of this overlay as well. Let's keep it black. Let's say I want to blur the background. I can add an effect, layer blur, and I control the amount of blur. Let's change it. There you go. You can just remove it from here using the minus. Next up, what if we want to share our prototype with someone? All we need to do is click share over here, and we invite whoever we want to share. We enter their email here and we invite them, and we can control if they can edit or if they are just a viewer. Same thing with the prototype. We can just share the prototype. We can either copy the link, we can control who sees it, anyone with the link can view, or we can make it invite only. But to invite people to edit, we have to move it into the projects and not keep it in the drafts. Finally, I'm going to teach you how to add comments on a file. We either press C and we click wherever you want to add a comment and you write it, or you can click the comment from over here. C, write a comment, for example, change pic, and then send it. You can also mention people by writing at and mentioning their name, but they have to be already invited or they have to be in your contacts already. And finally, I want to show you how to hide these sidebars, and you do that by pressing Ctrl/. So we have a clean view to preview what we're working on, Ctrl// again to see them. Or you can always right click, show hide UI. You can also lock stuff. For example, you want to lock this screen or lock some elements inside the screen. You select them, right click, lock. After that, I cannot move them. If I want to unlock them, I right click and I unlock. The comments, you can mark them as resolved, or you can hide them using Shift-C. Alright, that's it for this Figma tutorial. There's a lot more to Figma that you can discover on your own, and there are a lot of tutorials out there. Most of them are using the old Figma UI, which is quite similar to this one. The only difference is that this toolbar is on the top and some of the properties are in different locations, but they all function the same. So the more you use Figma, the more you'll discover, and the better you'll become at it, and the faster you'll become at it. Good luck, and hope this tutorial was useful.